Hello students, we are in 8-3 and we're going to be learning about absolute value. We're going to start off with the launch problem. Just try your absolute hardest. It's just to get your brains thinking. It's okay if you get it wrong.
Two discus throwers try out for the track team. Thrower 1 throws the discus forward, but thrower 2 slips and throws the discus the wrong way. You're the coach. How would you record the distance of each throw? Who threw the discus farther? Who would you choose for the team?
Here is a possible solution. So thrower 2 threw further than thrower 1, so you might choose thrower 2. However, you would risk the chance of thrower 2 constantly throwing in the wrong direction. So maybe in that case, you would choose thrower 1 over thrower 2. Either way, if you can justify your answer, you probably have a correct answer. Moving on to the key concept.
The absolute value of 5 is the distance from 5 to 0. Starting at 0, count. 1 unit, 2 units, 3 units, 4 units, 5 units. 5 is 5 units from 0. The absolute value of 5 is 5. The absolute value of -5 is the distance from -5 to 0. Starting at 0, count. 1 unit, 2 units, 3 units, 4 units, 5 units. -5 is 5 units from 0. The absolute value of -5 is 5. Let's look at them together. The absolute value of -5 is 5. The absolute value of 5 is 5. Opposite numbers have the same absolute value.
So the absolute value of a number is its distance from 0 on a number line. So since the absolute value is a distance, an absolute value is never negative. So even though this is on -5, the absolute value of this is positive. And then the symbol that we can use for absolute value are these lines. So we see it up here. We see them down here. These lines that are around -5, and then these lines that are around this 5. We want to now find the absolute values of A, B, and C. So I'll do 9, absolute value of 9, and I want you guys to do B, which is absolute value of -3, and C, absolute value of 0. So 9 on the number line, if I count, is here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So the value of 9 is right here. The absolute value of 9 is how far from 0 is it? So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 units away from 0. So the absolute value of 9 equals 9. Now it's your turn. The next two are a little bit harder, so it's up to you to try it, and then I will show you the answer soon. All right, so for checking the absolute value of -3, we find -3 on our number line. So 1, 2, 3. We went in the negative direction, so this is -3. Now what I want to do is find the distance from 0. So it's 1, 2, 3 units away from 0, so the absolute value of -3 is simply 3. Remember that absolute values cannot be negative. If we look at the absolute value of C, which is absolute value of 0, the distance from 0 that 0 is still 0. There's no such thing as -0, so this really just stays the same. Absolute value of 0 is 0. Here's the part 1 got it problem. And here's the correct answer. Moving on to part 2, what they want us to do is order these values from the greatest to least. So I know, because I just learned in the key concept and we just talked about it in part 1, that absolute values cannot be negative numbers. Absolute value of a number will be positive, so I'll have to look. The absolute value of -3 is 3. The absolute value of -7 is 7. The absolute value of 1 is 1, and the absolute value of 0 is 0. So I know that these are going to be my greater numbers because these numbers, -1, -7, -3, are negative numbers and they will stay negative numbers. So 7, absolute value of -7 is 7, is the greatest number that I have. The next one is -3, absolute value of -3, sorry. Then we have absolute value of 1, absolute value of 0. Then we would start looking at what comes next on my number line. If I go from 0 into my negative numbers, I would first come across -1, then -3, last but not least, -7. If I check my answer, good job, Miss Holt, I got it correct. Yay me. Now it's your turn. We're still in part 2, it's a got it problem, and they want you to order these values from least to greatest. So last time was greatest to least. This time I want you to order them from least to greatest. The correct answer is -5, -3, -2, the absolute value of 2, which is 2, and the absolute value of -5, which is 5. A helpful hint, if you would like to, you can rewrite these numbers. So rewrite absolute value of 2 as 2. Rewrite the absolute value of -5 as 5. And then order the numbers from least to greatest using these numbers rather than the absolute values. Got it problem, part 2, it's the second one.
Which is greater, the opposite of the absolute value of 3, or the absolute value of the opposite of 3?
Here is the answer to the got it problem. You can read it through, and it kind of explains it. We started with the opposite of the absolute value of 3, so they wrote that right here. The negative sign can be referred to as with the word opposite. So opposite and negative sign are meaning the same thing right now. So the opposite, or negative, absolute value of 3. The answer to this problem is -3. Absolute value of 3 is 3, and we want the opposite of 3. So that's -3. Down here it's telling us the absolute value of the opposite of 3. So once the absolute value of the opposite of 3, which is -3. So the opposite, or the absolute value of -3. The absolute value of -3 is 3, and we know that 3 is greater than -3. So the absolute value of the opposite of 3 is greater than the opposite of the absolute value of 3. Moving on to part 3.
You can represent the positions of the divers relative to sea level using the integers -2 and -5. However, depth is a positive quantity, so the depths of the divers are given by the absolute value of -2 and the absolute value of -5. Since -2 is greater than -5, diver A has the greater position relative to sea level. Since the absolute value of -5 is greater than the absolute value of -2, diver B has the greater depth.
Moving on to the example problem.
A college student is working during the summer to save money for the upcoming school year. She deposits the money she earns working. The money she withdraws she uses to pay for her living expenses. In which month did the college student spend the most money?
Deposits are the amount of money that you put into the bank. Withdrawals are what you take out of the bank. So in which month did the college student spend the most money? If she took it out of the bank, it's assuming that she spent it. So minus 400, minus 325, minus 450, or minus 550, we want to know which did she take out the most amount in. So $550 is when she took out the most, even though negative 550 is the smallest amount on here. On a number line, negative 550 goes way left than compared to all of the other numbers. However, we want to find the absolute value. Absolute value of negative 550 would show us that even though that's the smallest value out of here, it's describing the most amount of money spent. Part 3, got it problem.
You are diving off a boat into the ocean. You record your position relative to sea level on each dive. On which dive did you dive the deepest?
The correct answer is B, the second dive. Even though negative 14 is less than negative 12, negative 10, and negative 8, the absolute value of negative 14 is telling us that that was the distance away from 0 they went, and that is further than the absolute value of negative 12, absolute value of 10, and absolute value of negative 8. And here is the last got it problem of the lesson.
For each statement, give an example that shows the statement is false. 1. The absolute value of a number is less than the given number. 2. The absolute value of a number always equals the number. 3. The absolute value of a number is always the opposite of the number.
Here is some possible solutions, but the answers will definitely vary. So the absolute value of negative 7 is not less than negative 7. The absolute value of negative 3 is not equal to negative 3. And the absolute value of 4 is not the opposite of 4. The absolute value of 4 equals 4, and the opposite of 4 is negative 4, and 4 does not equal negative 4. That's the end of 8-3 absolute values. If you have questions on this, please come to me in class and ask. This can be a tricky concept. I know the first 2 lessons of this topic is kind of easy, or they were kind of easy. So this is when it starts to get a little bit trickier. So please ask questions if you need help. See you later.